Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Bite Size Nutrition Podcast. I'm Gillian, and today I have a very special guest. I have a client of mine, my client Carrie, and I invited Carrie on the podcast today to talk a little bit about her journey within coaching, but also her journey within herself over the time that we've gotten the chance to work together. And so I want to kind of open this up to have a deeper conversation about what coaching can look like, but also what it can look like when your focus changes. And so, Carrie, do you want to introduce yourself and maybe just kind of share a little bit about who you are?
Yeah, sure. So I am a 40-year-old mom of twin boys. My boys are seniors in high school, and my husband is retired from 21 years in the military. And I just, recently went through a job change, and I actually think like a whole life shift, which I'm sure we're gonna get into. But that's just kind of where I'm at right now.
Yeah, and Carrie, I love like to start at the beginning. I think within our
Yeah.
conversations we often like start and then end up diving into something
Oh,
completely
yeah.
different. But I'd love to at least try to start at the beginning here. So
Yeah.
tell me a little bit if you can look back to when we first started chatting, kind of what was going on in your life, your relationship with food, your relationship with your body when you found me.
Yeah, absolutely, and actually, I could go even further back,
Go as far back as you want.
yeah, because it really starts and I'm sure many people can relate of our generation, the millennial, growing up with, dieting and Atkins and Weight Watchers and all of that, seeing our mothers, or, the women in our lives struggling with, food and the skinny culture and exercise culture and all of that. My earliest memories of weight was, when I was like 6 or 7 years old, going to Weight Watchers meetings with my mom, and she would win these little raffles, and we'd go home with like a new cup or a Weight Watchers point calculator, and I just remember that. Growing up, going to these meetings with her, and her conversations with my grandmother would revolve around food. Um, and it was always just like a big part of our talking. And my mom would frame it as healthy eating. We want to be healthy. When we were little girls, we would have rice cakes and snack wells, and we wouldn't have sugary cereals in the house or Kool-Aid like my friends would have. And then even later on in high school, I was a pretty naturally thin girl, but never athletic or anything like that. And my mom would take me to the Weight Watchers meetings more as like an educational thing at that point. And she signed me up, so that I could easily get my lifetime membership so that I would have it for my whole life, to come back to whenever I needed uh, help losing weight, because it was just kind of known that dieting and weight would be a lifelong struggle. And so, she was doing me a favor by helping me, when I was 17, 18, getting that lifetime membership card so I wouldn't have to pay for it later on. And, it was just very normalized that that's just how food was. Food was always going to be a struggle. And then started with exercising at the YMCA, and I had my kids, and I joined Stroller Fit, and I would join, different challenges and yoga. And then later on, it would be um, the Whole 30 and the grapefruit diet and the juice cleanse. And again, in my head, I'm framing it all as being healthy, being disciplined. It really became a part of my identity as like this healthy, fit, active person. And not only like internally, but like externally, the feedback I would get from everybody, these compliments of, oh, you're so disciplined, and oh, I wish I could do the things that you did, just kind of reinforced like I was on the right path. Um, but it never came from a place of like compassion and peace. It was very distorted. It was always because you can never be enough, right? Because there's always going to be like food at Thanksgiving and all of that. So like that restrictive attitude or discipline, it wasn't like mentally healthy. Um, but I was just kind of on this roller coaster of being on, being off, being on, being off, because these strict diets are not sustainable, right? Calculating macros. I did that for a while. I did, all of the cleanses and programs and MLMs that are out there. I tried them all. And each one I was like, this is going to be it. This is going to be sustainable. I can do this for the rest of my life and I'll never have to worry about, um um health and eating again because like this is just going to be my plan. But of course, it's a roller coaster. Then you always fall off, and then there's that shame and that frustration, and the progress pictures and the weight, um, the stepping on the scale. I was stepping on the scale every day, and if the clothes are a little bit too tight, and just that shame spiral. And it was COVID hit. My job became a lot more stressful after COVID. Work in the education field, so obviously, all many industries were hit with COVID, but particularly education was one of them. And my job kept getting more stressful, and I wasn't getting necessarily the support I needed there, and it just kind of came to a head around the time I found you, where it was just like all of these diets and all of these plans and all of this exercise that I've always done, it wasn't working anymore. I wasn't seeing the same results that I was seeing before. I wasn't losing the weight as fast as I was before. Um, and I was just so frustrated and I would cry and I would just, this is not me. This is not my body. This is not, um, yeah, it was a really painful time. And, I found you on social media and you were sharing about, the Confident Eater program. And at that point, I was thick and trying to calculate my macros. I was like, because it makes scientific sense, it makes logical sense. Calories in, calories out, macros, and heavy lifting, and body composition, and all this stuff makes so much sense. And I remember DMing you and asking, can I do the Confident Eater and calculate macros? And you're like, well, this is a little bit more of a conversation than we can have in the DMs. I'd be happy to chat with you. And I remember our very first chat. And again, in my head, I know it all because I've done all of the diets and I've gone to Weight Watchers and I understand nutrition and I understand exercise. So, like in my head, I know it all. And, you would ask me these questions, and that really made me kind of stop and pause. Like, who is Carrie without exercise? Who is Carrie without, if you just didn't diet or track anything again, like who would that be? And those questions just kind of stopped me. I felt myself getting really defensive. And after we got off the phone, I was like sobbing because I'm like, who am I? And that was what led me to sign up for the Confident Eater, because I'm like, if this triggered me so much, there's something there. There's something there, and I need to figure out what it is. Um, but yeah, like just the fact that I was like getting defensive, and you were just so calm, cool, collected. You just like let it come, let it go. Um, but you're, oh, okay, just real sweetly. And yeah, do you remember any of that?
I remember our first conversation. I had no idea that you got off the phone and that it had touched you so emotionally.
Oh
And
yeah.
I remember you coming into the program and being really engaged and specifically really kind of latching onto this idea of values and being like, wait,
Mm,
what, like my core values? And I remember in our first conversation, I do remember talking about mindful eating specifically because that's what you
yeah.
and I did so much work on. and you being like, but some foods are just hyper palatable. Like, how could I ever eat those foods mindfully when they're engineered to make me want
Yeah.
to eat more of them? And
I did not believe in mindful eating. I
wow.
believed in mindfulness, right?
Mhm.
Part of my career. I believed in mindfulness, but I did not believe in mindful eating. I
Yeah,
didn't think that that was a possibility
yeah. And
because of
and
engineered food and because of our culture and because our bodies are constantly seeking, you know, quick sources of carbohydrates and energy and all of that. Like I just did not believe that in this culture that we live in, we could be mindful eaters.
yeah. And I mean, obviously, since you're here, I that's changed.
2 years later.
But and so because we started working together through the Confident Eater program, which is my group
Yes.
program, and then you made the choice to jump into one-on-one coaching and kind of continue that work. And what would you say kind of now, we've started at the beginning, now let's jump to the kind of the end and then we can kind of work through the middle. Where
Yeah.
do you find yourself now, kind of compared to where you were when we started working together?
Um, well, I'm glad you brought up the values because that was, again, something that I never really dug into or thought much about. And, that was one of the first activities in the Confident Eater was really like defining your values. And, we spent a lot of time on that. And I have to say, my values that I defined back then are still very true today. And I feel like back then they were like aspirational and now I feel like I'm actually truly living them, right? I'm actually building my life around them and it feels so good. Like back then I was like treading water, like trying to reach them, trying so my values peace, connection and joy, right? It's like I would have a lot of joy, but not so much peace, or my connections were not as strong as I would like. Like they weren't as fulfilling. I didn't make time for my friends. I didn't make time for my family like I would want to. Didn't prioritize them. So how could I value them if I wasn't, using my time to um nourish those pieces of my life. And I feel like I've, through just really tearing everything apart, tearing everything down and rebuilding, I've been able to um, build my life around those things that are important to me.
It's it's so interesting because as you were kind of talking through your story at the beginning, you were talking about how much of it was focused on like food and appearance and
Yeah.
weight and dieting. And now as you're talking, it's like, no, it's focused on who I am as a person and
Yeah.
what brings me joy. I hope it's okay that I share that like you even started writing, like journaling has been a big part of your
Oh,
process.
yeah.
And now you're writing a book, which is
Well,
insane. I mean, like even just the fact that you are putting that time and effort into this thing that is so important to you, I think is so beautiful to recognize. And I think, how do you see the shift happening? Because obviously who you are has changed so much, but what's gone on like with food, weight, your relationship with your body? Like what's happened? Because you were at the beginning of your story,
yeah.
that was such a huge part.
Right. Yeah, it was. And like didn't I and I don't want to get like too emotional, but like this is I've been very honest through our coaching relationship, and I've opened up in a lot of ways that I felt like ashamed of in the past. And I really felt like if I wasn't fit, pretty, disciplined, type A, do everything for everyone, Carrie, that I didn't have any value or worth. Like, who am I outside of that? Right. And I think that that was a really painful way to live. Right. And so it started, like I said, just with the values, and it started with, like, the hunger and fullness scale and looking for patterns, and then it really turned into, like, well, how does this make me feel? How do certain foods make me feel? How does it feel to be overfull? Like, just paying attention to, like, the internal signals of my body where that mindfulness came up, and I developed a different appreciation, I think, for my physical body that didn't have to do with like my physical appearance, just like the amazingness how my body sustains me and bounces back and heals me and makes me feel so good sometimes when I have a nice good stretch in the morning or do some yoga classes or get off the phone with a friend or laugh really hard, like all of those things that have nothing to do with my appearance, right? And then just starting to cultivate those things, like what does peace feel like in my body? What does joy feel like in my body? Not what it looks like. And and it's still a daily thing. It's not like, I flip the switch and all of a sudden I'm super confident and I have great body image and all of this. It's a daily thing, but I have these tools and I have these like mantras, and I'm more aware of my thoughts and how my thoughts affect my feelings and what actions and behaviors, so that CBT triangle,
Mhm.
what actions and behaviors support the positive feelings. But then also something that you've really helped me with was sitting in those uncomfortable feelings, because being a school counselor, you want your students to feel good, you want everyone around you to feel good, and so it's really hard to sit with some of those uncomfortable things without trying to problem solve them away, right? But you were really good about like, okay, well, hold on, let's just sit it, like look at all this stuff that you're doing, look at all your responsibility, really validating that you're going through some really tough times and these things are really painful, and like, let's name that, acknowledge it, sit in it, and then kind of move through it. And I think too, like a lot of like there were some things like screaming, like how do I express this anger, this pain, um give it life and let it work through me. So like with exercise, with screaming, I remember that time when I got on the call with you and I was like, I screamed and it hurt my throat, but it felt really good. I
I
was in the
remember.
car and I was driving and I just let it out. And I was like, whoa, that just came out of me. And it was really powerful. And it acknowledged the stress that I was under externally, internally. And I was like, I can allow myself to do that, you
Yeah.
know?
It's funny
So,
that you say that because I think one of the most incredible things about how you've grown is your capacity to show yourself compassion. And like so many of the clients I work with, before we started, you were really compassionate to others. Like you're really great at like being there for others and supporting others and being really compassionate to them. But receiving compassion and showing yourself compassion was like, ooh, no, I don't know if I deserve that. And I think kind of along the lines of that discomfort tolerance, like a lot of those uncomfortable
mm,
emotions, like that's really where you were able to build that compassion for myself or for
mhm.
yourself. And it's so interesting now because I remember one day, I don't remember if it was one of your check-ins or one of our calls, you were like, I never thought of myself as an emotional eater.
Right,
And
yeah.
and then as we started to explore emotion, you're like, oh my gosh, actually my emotions do affect how I eat. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so, again, like, I as a school counselor, and being, a nurturing mom and all of this, I felt like I understood my emotions, I was very self-reflective, you know, I didn't connect my eating with, I thought it was more like boredom eating, like I needed something to do with my hands, but I would recognize patterns, right, um by writing in the food journal, which is different from tracking, and that's something else we can talk about, like the intention, like the behaviors can be the same, but the intentions are different. But anyways, by looking at patterns, when I'd come home from work, I would get into bed and I would watch TV, my, trash TV, and I would just eat and eat and eat and eat. And it was a way to self-soothe. It was an easy, low-hanging way to self-soothe. And I didn't really make that connection until I looked at the patterns and kind of talked it through with you and realized I don't have many other coping strategies. I don't have many other coping strategies. What are some other things that I could do that wouldn't take much effort, but would help me feel better?
Yeah. Yeah.
You
It's
know,
so
like
interesting. Oh, sorry, go
So
ahead.
again, it's like that, emotions wheel, like really
Yeah.
identifying, like, how am I feeling right now, and what do I need? What does that feeling need, right? It doesn't need Real Housewives and popcorn. Some days it might, right? And you gave me permission to like, that can be a coping strategy. It shouldn't be my only coping strategy, like, let's build that out, but, like, dialing in on what am I feeling exactly? What is at the root of that? And what are some other things that might actually target that feeling better than Real Housewives and popcorn and Reese's cups?
And like you said, sometimes that's exactly what we need, but, like, I
Yeah.
think to your point, being able to know when it is that case and having those additional coping mechanisms is so important. And something that I think is really fascinating that I think you might resonate with is when we're stuck in a pattern of, like, restrictive dieting or over
Mm,
exercising, is that becomes our coping mechanism. It's like, I feel
mm,
uncomfortable, so I will diet harder, or I will
mm,
find this new workout program. And often when we kind of take that off the table, it's like, okay, well, now I'm not coping with my discomfort with diet or with fitness. And so now I actually need to learn ways that align with my values. Like, I know for you, journaling was a really big one.
mm,
The connection that you've developed with the people in your lives has also been really cool to kind of watch you do.
mhm.
And Oh, yeah. I think one of the things I wanna ask you kind of before was we got about, like, 10 minutes, I think, before we have to wrap up here, but I wanna hear from you. What is the biggest difference in how you feel about food in your body now compared to at the beginning of this process?
Yeah, so at the beginning of this process, it was like my life. I can't say my life, but my mental energy revolved around food and body image and exercise. Like, that was always in the background of my mind. When am I going to eat again? How many calories have I had today? Have I had enough protein? Have I had enough vegetables? Have I had too much sugar? Like, that was constantly running a running track in the back of my mind, and now it's not. Like, it's just not. I mean, obviously I still eat, I still overindulge here and there, but it's not like at the forefront of my mind. And that's huge. And I never thought I would ever be that way.
Yeah.
Like, I
Yeah.
don't know what else to say besides that, because that is that I
Yeah.
just and I think another thing, kind of going back to like body image and kind of this evolution. Another thing that shifted, that was really a hard pill to swallow, was um, you talked about how, your body will always change, and like with aging and everything, and how important like self compassion and acceptance is, because if my worth was connected to how I look, how fit I was, like, I'm 40, right? I just turned 40, last year, and then I'm going to be 50, and then I'm going to be 60. Does that mean that my worth diminishes as my health and fitness decline, or if I get injured, or if I get sick, or if something happens in my life where, I'm limited in some way? Like, does that mean that my worth also diminishes, and that was a really, it was really a painful awareness, but then also, it motivated me to engage in this process, and, like, I really need to value myself beyond the superficial stuff. I need to find other things that make me feel good about myself.
Yeah. And and what did you do or how did you kind of get through? Because I know there were some tough moments where it was like, hey, I don't know if I'm progressing, or like this is really challenging. I feel
Yeah.
like I'm trying this and it's like it's hard. And what kept you going? What kept you kind of showing up week after week and filling in your check-ins and showing up to our calls and putting in effort even when it did feel really hard?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I think that's where the coaching has helped me, versus me trying to do it on my own. Was I knew that you were like my cheerleader in the background. Like I knew that even if I filled out my check-in halfway, you would still be like, "Well, this was really great, and I'm really interested in hearing more about this." And it wouldn't be like, "Well, Carrie, you didn't fill out this and you didn't do that." Like it was a very compassionate, you have a very compassionate way of coaching. And in a way, I don't know if this is intentional or just like a pleasant byproduct of it, it was modeling how I can be compassionate to myself. You
Yeah.
know, your kind of unconditional positive regard, Carl Rogers. Um,
Love that term. Love it.
right, right. The way that you showed that to me week after week helped me show it to myself, and I kind of had that in the background of my mind. You know how good I felt after our calls, even the hard calls, um, how good I felt after that helped me keep going, keep wanting to get more of that.
I just have to say,
So,
thank you so much for saying that, because it is one of the things that I do try to do as much as possible is model compassion, partly
yeah.
because like I genuinely do feel like empathy and connection
Mm,
with all of my clients, because the struggles that you have resonate so much with the struggles that I've had in my life as well. Um,
yeah.
but it is really important, I think, in a coaching process, is like so much of this you've dealt with on your own.
Yeah.
And having someone on your team, I know when I've had someone on my team to support me in whatever challenges I'm going through, it's like, oh, thank God. Okay. Like
Yeah.
they've got me.
And Gillian, I have to say that was a really uncomfortable part in the beginning for me because I'm not used to
Yeah.
leaning so heavily on someone else and a stranger, like just yeah, and like all of my I feel like it needs to at the minimum be reciprocal. Well, how are you doing and how is
Mhm.
your day going and what's going on in your life, right? And so it was really hard for me to kind of step out of that role and fully lean on you, and you're very gifted in that way. You always turn it back on me.
Thank you so much. I
you
really
you
appreciate that.
didn't let me, and not in a like, nope, we're not talking about me, off limits type of way, not like that at all, but just in a really caring way,
Yeah.
like this is
Life
about
working
you.
for
This
you.
is
Yeah.
exactly, and I felt that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
And Carrie, I think if anyone listening right now could take away kind of like one thing that from what you said, or what you've learned, what like the growth that you've had, or your experience in coaching, what would you want them to know or take away from this, from hearing you?
Um, that you can't um hate yourself into a happy life, right? You can't beat yourself uh into a comfortable, happy, joy-filled life, right? It has to come from a place of compassion, and that's something that you have to intentionally cultivate because it's not um, supported in our culture,
Yeah.
really, right? In capitalism, it's not supported for you to be happy and compassionate towards yourself through the ebbs and the flows. So, um, definitely like build yourself a team, right? Build a toolbox, and don't be afraid to go deep and be honest, and see what happens. Be brave.
Oh, I agree with that so much. And we could go into like capitalism and patriarchy and how it like keeps women needing to feel small. But I guess
That's
the
another
last
podcast.
that's a completely different podcast. But Carrie, I guess my last question for you is just really briefly, if someone were kind of in the position that you were in and
Mhm.
didn't know kind of what their next step should be, do you have any advice or recommendations for them?
Um, I think find someone because again, like there's so much information online, but I think having someone that you connect with who is knowledgeable, who helps you feel empowered is priceless, right? That will help you work through things because you don't know what your blind spots are, right?
Mm,
And so sometimes you need someone to hold that mirror up to you. And like I said, that takes courage to do that. And if you're feeling stuck, just knowing that you don't have to go through it alone, right?
yeah.
That there are people out there who have been through it, who get it, and who can help you, right?
Yeah.
And then, finding that team, finding that tribe.
Yeah. I think what you said there is so impactful because one of the characteristics of like when we're struggling so much with food in our bodies is like there's a lot of shame. And I'm sure you
Oh,
experience
yeah.
that. It's like, well, I don't want to tell people how much I'm really struggling because outside,
Yeah.
like I'm supposed to look a certain way.
Yeah. I got it all
And it does.
together.
Yeah. And you're right, is it takes so much courage to like open up and share with someone. But I think, and that's like kind of what I hope to do with the podcast in general is just like
Yeah.
let people know that like you are not alone in this
Mm.
stuff. And also, you deserve to get help and to get support.
Mm.
So, yeah. Well,
Yeah. Yeah.
Carrie, I love talking to you because I've been gotten to do it every 2 weeks for the last couple of years.
Yeah. Thank
But
you.
I really appreciate you taking the time to share a bit more about your experience. And I even learned, I mean, as well as I know you at this point, I even learned some new things about your journey that I didn't know before. So
Yeah.
thank you so much for joining. I really
Of
appreciate it.
course. Of course. Keep doing it, Gillian. Keep fighting the fight because it makes a difference. It matters. It's important work
Thank you.
for
I
sure.
really appreciate that.
Yeah.